question concerns the Community Access Network, which is a SCAN television access. Is one of the public, educational, and government access cable channels in Seattle. They provided camera equipment, TV studios, and training that allow residents to create and cablecast their own television shows for a small fee. It was one of the ways for immigrants, refugees, and communities of color to showcase their culture and arts programs. After it was closed, no alternative network has been established. What are your plans to reopen a similar network that includes sustainable live broadcasting to provide great interactive discussions?
Well, first, thank you. It's good to be here. My name is Ed Murray, and I've been in the legislature for the last 18 years. You're supposed to hold your applause. So, one of the goals I would have would actually deal with the Seattle channel and integrating some of the programs that belong to the last scan into the Seattle channel, so that programs in different languages and different cultures could be created in conjunction with the Seattle channel, as well as search for resources to restore the earlier programming.
Now, there were two things one time. One was we had a very bad budget. The other was that technology was changing, and the old technology had to be updated and made different. So now that our economy is stronger, I would like to bring back the live television broadcasting again. We'll work to get that into the budget as we move forward. We've also worked to expand our technology matching grants as well, and provide those types of technology matching grants, particularly so that our ethnic and immigrant refugee communities can have access to computers and other equipment. And we'll keep working to expand that, because there's many ways now of communicating, and we want people to have access to all of those.
Mayor McGann, immigrants, refugees, and communities of color have community centers of their own. They provide a cultural and social gathering place for many groups, such as this community center here, but many are volunteer-based. If elected, what type of capacity support can you provide for these centers, and how will you prioritize funding this type of support?
So first of all, I just want to say I am very grateful to the work that is done by the volunteers and to the individuals in all of the various community centers we have. And I have come to appreciate every year, I appreciate more the roles that they play in helping when new immigrants are coming to this country, that they can identify with their own culture, that services are provided, and that they have a way to land. When we did our neighborhood matching fund grants, we actually had an emphasis on helping, reaching out to the community centers to see if we could fund improvements in the community centers. And I know we did a number of those in different community centers. We also have a grant from the federal government that we're working on as well to have a multicultural community center down in the valley as well. And we've been working with everybody on how we can have shared facilities. But I also know that communities like their own cultural centers as well. So one of the things I wanted to do, and again, our budget was bad. Now we're rebuilding our budget. This last year was the first time we had new money. I would like to establish more dollars for capital funding and support for our ethnic cultural centers because of the specific work they do.
Senator Murray, you heard that question, or do you want me to repeat it?
No, I heard it. Thank you. And by the way, this is a great crowd today. Thank you for being out here. I think there are two things that we can do to approach the community and cultural centers. First of all, there's a fund in the state construction program for community centers. And I think we could be more aggressive at going after that. Second, I think we should create in the city an identical fund that community centers can apply to for capital improvements for construction improvements. So that's what I would do. I would create a fund that looks very similar to the one we created at the state level, and I would try and marry those two together so that we would have an opportunity over a period of years to upgrade the community centers.
Thank you. Mayor McGinn, the next area of inquiry is about jobs, local hiring, including the Education and Family Levy. When it was passed, the levy, it was to help immigrants, refugees, and communities of color have fair opportunities to compete for funded projects. For the most part, the money went to the schools, who then had the authority to pick the organization of their choice. How will you ensure that refugees, immigrants, and communities of color have fair access and opportunities to compete for the different contracts that the city puts out for bid, including the levy funds?
So I'll speak first about the levy funds. The grants were made to the schools, and the schools had the option to choose their community partners. And we worked with the different community partners to qualify them, to give them the capacity to improve their ability to compete for those funds. And many community organizations did get funds, but the fact is we can't fund every community organization. Generally speaking, with minority contracting, we changed the rules in the city of Seattle. We have more than tripled minority contracting in the city, and we're setting all-time records on that. The other thing we did was, and not just capital, but purchasing as well. 20% is going to women and minority, which is an all-time record in contracting. We also have local hire provisions that we put into our community power works, which is the energy efficiency work. So the contractor has to hire local people. We put a local hire provision into the seawall contract, and we are working to get a local hire provision that applies to all of our city contracting. And that's the next thing we're working on with the city council and passing. So we hire people from our own community for the capital projects we pay for in the city.
Senator Murray.
Sure, thank you. So in regards to the family and education levy, I do think that there are some issues that we should look at. Grants are competitive, and that means that not all folks have the same resources, not all community groups have the same resources, not all schools in the city have the same resources. So I think one of the things we should do and look at is, are there areas of high poverty, particularly in minority communities, where we should simply direct that money towards those young people so that we actually get the results that we need. And also, I think we need to be sure that some organizations are very small, but they may be the most efficient organization. And I think we need to be sure that we're not cutting off small organizations just because of capacity issues. The mayor, I want to compliment the mayor on the contracts. He's right. I think we can do more. I think the idea of looking at actually targeting by zip code, which we're allowed to do, to encourage companies to actually hire from areas where we know that there are minorities and where we know that there's an issue of unemployment, is something that we should look at in addition to the good work that's been done.
Senator Murray, you spoke a little bit just now about the educational levy funds. Do you have a plan to help community-based organizations access the levy more directly?
Well, so I've heard this during the last 10.5 months on the campaign trail from community-based organizations, particularly ones that are dealing with immigrants. And what I would do is, I would make some adjustments that we have enough technical skill built into the family and education levy so that those folks who don't have the same grant writing skill or the same financial resources to hire somebody would actually be able to assist community groups that are struggling to get those funds. So in other words, I would add grant writing skills into the program.
Mayor McGinn?
Yeah, so you have to remember the most important person in making sure a school succeeds is the principal. And if you want anything to work, you really do have to be working through the school. So we do intend to work through the schools, but we do work to improve the capacity of community partners with the schools. I want to say a few more things. One, we've doubled the Families and Education levy at the time the state was cutting. so we're doing a lot more work and there's more money available. Second, those are not the only grant funds we have. We balanced our budget, rebuilt the rainy day fund while protecting and expanding all human services programs. And so we have grant funding programs that are outside of the schools in which we are working to improve the capacity of community-based organizations to have access to those dollars as well. We've expanded the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, which reaches many of our young people as well. We brought the Neighborhood Matching Fund up to pre-recession levels. We've restored that funding as well. We have Neighborhood Business District Grant Funds, which are new. So what I would say to you is there is the levy funds, which we go through the schools, but there are many other sources of funding which we have been increasing to try to get more dollars into all of our communities and community organizations.
Thank you. Mayor McGinn, many of our children are college graduates, and yet they're unable to find City of Seattle jobs. For example, we're aware that many communities of color are underrepresented, in particular East Africans at the City of Seattle. If you are re-elected, what is your plan or what pathways will you create so that a representative number of our graduates from communities of color can compete and be hired by the city?
I think I'd say several things. One is, with the recession, we weren't hiring for a little while. We were tending to let people go more than we were adding. Now we are adding more people, and that will make it easier for us to accommodate more people. I would point to the hiring we're doing in our police department. We have now retained community-based organizations to help us recruit more people from the community into our police department. And we'll use those same types of techniques to recruit across city government as well. The other thing we've looked at is really improving our youth jobs. Lots of people get summer jobs with the city or internships, or we have quite a few, actually almost up to a couple of thousand of those jobs. And I think that's another place where we can be targeted to youth, because when people get to know each other, that's oftentimes a good way to then get the full-time job later. Finally, the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, which we expanded, that's also a place we provide jobs for those youth as well, and we're using our Office of Arts and Culture, in which we've also increased the grant monies available to youth organizations and community organizations to help find jobs for the kids in that program.
Thank you. Senator Murray?
Thank you. Well, I think the issue is that we want the city government, and there's roughly 11,000 employees, to look like the city itself. And that would begin, if I become mayor, with the mayor's office. There would actually be East Africans who would be in the mayor's office. And I would instruct my department heads.
Please hold your applause. Thank you.
And I would instruct my department heads to aggressively recruit people who have the educational skills to get into the jobs in city government. Or if there's an issue around not having those educational skills, working with our community colleges and universities in the city, both public and private, to get them those educational skills so they can qualify to be hired. My goal would be to have a city government and a city, the 11,000 employees, to be as diverse as the city of Seattle.
Mayor McGinn. I'm sorry. Thank you. Going back then to Senator Murray, what is your commitment to clear barriers for construction opportunities, and how would you ensure that people with low income, refugees, immigrants, and communities of color have equitable access to the career pathways for those construction opportunities in the city of Seattle?
So the question about job opportunities was limited just to construction or just in general? In
particular, construction.
Okay. Well, there is some policies, and I just complimented the mayor for progress that's been made in the city. I think you need to continue with those policies. But also I think that we need to be sure that we, as a city, develop an economic development plan that tries to identify businesses who are willing to move into different parts of the city where there isn't good employment, and at the same time work with our school system again to train individuals who live there who could actually qualify for those jobs right in their own communities.
So that was the local hire provisions I was talking about earlier. So for example, we get federal grant money to do energy efficiency work to upgrade homes and commercial buildings. And what we did was we told the contractors that in order to get the energy efficiency grants, we brought together unions, contractors, lenders, and community leaders. In this case, it was Michael Wu from Got Green was one of the leaders at the table. And they entered into what was called a community workforce agreement, where the contractor would agree they had to buy somebody from the local community. We also set up a job training program at South Seattle Community College on home weatherization, so that we could, so there'd be a certain number of hires that would have to be from the community, and they would actually then be, these would be pathways to union jobs. On construction jobs generally, like the seawall, we had to do the same thing. The unions are used to deciding who gets to work on a job. And what we did was we negotiated with the unions, and again, the community leaders, to come up with a community workforce agreement where we can hire disadvantaged people from the community to get into pathways to union jobs. And we're going to use that experience from those two programs to make that the requirement on all of our city contracting, is that a certain number of jobs have to be local hires to get people into those higher paying construction jobs.
Our next question is about housing. I think we'll start with the mayor. What do you see as the city's role in ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to live in a safe, healthy, affordable home? Specifically, what policy changes, if any, do you think are necessary to reduce barriers to housing for marginalized groups, particularly refugees, immigrants, and people of color?
Yeah, and I think I've been speaking too fast because there's so many things I want to say in each answer. On this one, our Office of Civil Rights goes, and we did this, we sent out a white person and a black person with the same resume to apply for housing and see how the landlords responded. And it was discouraging to discover that the white person got better treatment than the black person. So we went out and we working to educate our homeowners, our landlords, and press on this. We also have to provide more affordable housing. We're working with Sound Transit to take the empty lots that they own up and down the Rainier Valley and help get them into affordable housing. I believe we should increase the housing levy. And when we give additional zoning to developers, we're reviewing how much should they pay for affordable housing or how much they include affordable housing in the project they build, as well as helping making it easier for the just market rate housing to come along, different types, so that we have more affordable types of housing as well. So many different approaches, and it's very important for us to work on this.
Senator Murray.
Thank you. By the way, I want to compliment the timekeeper. This is the first time in our debates where we not only get a stop sign, but we get a thank you sign. We in Seattle are kind of at a serious crossroads. We, not by law, but by just choice, have become a very segregated city by race. And actually, to such an extent in recent years that it may raise legal problems with the federal government. We are actually, I was talking to Ron Sims, who you know was Assistant Director at HUD for President Obama, and he pointed out that Seattle is becoming less diverse as South King County and Bellevue is becoming more diverse. He even pointed out that middle-class people of color are choosing to live in South Seattle and in Bellevue. So we have a real challenge to not only provide for affordable housing, but to ensure that our city is more diverse through its neighborhoods. And you know, some of the ways we can do this, the Housing Trust Fund on the state levels have been a significant part. Over several mayors, as Mayor McGinn just mentioned, the housing levy is important. But we also, I think, believe we need to look at some initiatives that are happening around the country, where certain sectors of folks who are working but can't afford to buy or rent, that actually that market rate housing has some level of subsidies through a public-private or a public nonprofit organization that would allow working people to actually buy houses and live in Seattle, so that we don't end up, I'm going to stop because you said thank you.
Our next topic, but they face various barriers, some of which are based in cultural insensitivity. How will you work with our communities to develop apprenticeship programs for these positions? Mayor McGinn? Senator Murray, thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, one of the issues, the mayor mentioned that some of our community-based agencies are trying to recruit people who live in Seattle to be in our police force. Our police force is made up of mostly people who have never lived in Seattle. And I don't think we have found out what the cultural problem is. It's one thing to recruit them, but we also need to keep them. There's a cultural issue within our police force that we have to change if we're not going to just recruit them but keep them. It's interesting, years and years ago, the city of Seattle's police department had a cadet program, and young people in their late high school or early college years actually were hired on. They weren't allowed to carry guns. They were allowed to participate in certain of the police activities, and it actually was a way to bring people into the police force and get folks interested in the police force. And I think if we worked with our communities, our immigrant communities and our communities of color on a program like that, we might be able to get around the issue that we've been struggling with to get more Seattleites to be actually police officers.
You know, Community Center, Atlantic Street Center, and El Centro de la Raza to help us recruit within the community. The next was trying to remove barriers to applications. If somebody had had a minor run-in with the law, but it was in their past and it didn't reflect on their character, you could still consider them. Let people know that a tattoo didn't disqualify you like people thought it did. So trying to be much more sensitive to the conditions of folks. But then the next thing was preparing people better as well. So in partnership with South Seattle Community College, we have launched a free class, 5-credit class. It's free that anyone can take, and that can help prepare them for the police examination as well. So we're working to reduce the barriers so we can get more people from our community into the department. And I will say, when I meet police officers who are from our community and active in the community, they're some of the best assets the city has, and I've appreciated getting to know them.
Mayor McGinn, if you are reelected, how will you make the police department as ethnically and culturally diverse as the communities they serve?
Yeah, we were just speaking to that issue. I mean, one piece is the recruiting and hiring, and we're going to be hiring a lot of new officers over the next few years. We're also talking about, it's not just in the hiring process, I mean, that's probably what you're asking, but it's also having a better understanding of the community and a different way of interacting with the community. So one is changing the training from one which is command and control to listening and understanding and explaining to everyone what's going on. Even someone you're arresting, they should understand. And that we're working to change the training at the state level and get training that's Seattle specific, including doing some of the training here as well. We're also putting all of our officers through race and social justice training. We're putting our sergeants through a special sergeants academy so that we can have better mentoring of our new officers so that they can understand the community they're working in. All of these things are critical. Getting the right people, having the right training, interacting with the community with equity and dignity.
Recruiting. I think the fact that we have community-based organizations recruiting is very important, but I also want to go back to the fact I talked about before, that there seems to be some cultural barrier within the police department. And I actually think that's probably going to take some sort of study that the city's going to have to launch in conjunction with perhaps a university that specializes in public safety issues. Because until we figure that out, I don't think we're going to get the numbers of people in the police force who represent the diversity of this community. So I want to go back to that basic fact. Secondly, I have urged, and it will take a change in state law, that we actually have a Seattle Police Academy so that our police officers are entirely trained in an urban, diverse, economically, ethnic, and racially city, and not in suburban King County. The experience of being trained in suburban King County is different than if all that training happens right here in Seattle. It'll have to be a long-term goal because there's some costs involved, but the city years and years ago, again, did have an academy right here. Thank you.
Cultural sensitivity by the police department towards immigrants, refugees, and communities of color. Why do you think changing the chief police will change the perspective and policy of the police department?
By itself, it won't. Hiring a chief who understands how you change a police department a chief who's actually had experience in changing the culture of a police department is very important, but by itself, it's not enough. The training components I talked about are very important. The leadership from the mayor's office itself is very important, that certain behaviors are simply unacceptable. It is a combination of things, but the chief is part of how we get at that, but it's not the only thing.
Top down and bottom up. And I've really worked in everything we've done to try to do bottom up. So for example, we talked about the levy before. We went out and did town halls and we listened to people, over 3,000 people, and we hired people from the community to bring people to us to tell us, or we would go where they were. So we did something called Safe Communities Outreach, which we did the same thing. In each precinct, we held multiple small meetings. We hired public outreach liaisons who were from the communities themselves, and we listened in small groups, and then those groups elected people to come together for a summit in each community. But it wasn't just that it was the mayor's office, it was the police officers themselves from the precinct who were doing that outreach. And what we heard from all of the participants, that action of getting to know your police officers, and the police officers hearing directly from community members about what they were concerned about, it's that type of bottom-up relationship building which will do a lot to improve, I believe, the culture of our police department. And we're going to keep at it. And again, there are police officers who fully commit themselves to that, and they can be leaders in the department for all of the rest of the department.
After your election or re-election, whichever the case may be.
Yeah, that's if we keep the alternating, I think it's mine. Absolutely, and this is what I want to say to you. I have worked as hard as I can to make my office as open and as accessible as I can and bring new people into government, whether it was the Youth and Families Initiative or the Safe Communities Initiative. Let me give you an example. We are now ordering all of our departments, when they do outreach, they have to connect with our ethnic media, because that is the way many people get their communications. And that also means they can have a little more advertising to keep their ethnic media strong. I have done I've done over 150 town halls, but many of those I did with interpreters present. And so I could take questions from every community. And I brought my department heads and department staff with me. We have an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and Leno reports directly to me. And we want to continue to expand our ability to hear from you, work with you, because your first point is the right one. Our immigrant and refugee communities make this city so much stronger, and it's been a great honor, frankly. It's been an honor for 4 years to get to build those relationships and learn how to better work with you, and I would love your vote to do it again for an additional 4 years. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. During my time in the legislature, the short answer is yes. And the proof is, during my time in the legislature, one of the areas I focused on are issues of immigrants. I restored the funding for the New Americans program. I restored the funding for the refugees food program. I led the effort and wrote the original DREAM Act bill, allowing young people who came here as children undocumented access to the state need grant. And you know, the reason I became interested in those issues actually started when I was a kid. My grandparents who lived in New York, my grandfather would tell me when he came to this country he would see signs and it said help wanted, but underneath it said no Irish need apply. And I knew my grandfather, and knowing what he suffered, it really kind of woke up me to the issues that you all face in this country, and that's why I've worked hard on these issues to restore funding and to create some of the programs we've created. So I would love to continue to work with you all on those issues at the local level, and thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would love to have your vote. This atmosphere on very contentious issues. I work in a situation where the two parties disagree pretty significantly in Olympia. But despite that, I've been able to accomplish some things in my time in Olympia. When we were in a 49 tie in the House, 49 Democrats, 49 Republicans, I was one of 2 co-chairs of the construction budget. And we doubled the amount of money we put in the Housing Trust Fund for low-income housing. We could put the first state money into farm worker housing. So then I became transportation chair. And we passed the largest transportation package in state history. And it was focused on replacing structures that were falling down like the viaduct and restoring some of the transit, pedestrian, and bicycle programs that had been eliminated earlier by an initiative from our friend Tim Iman. And he's not my friend, that was a joke. And then, I've worked on a civil rights bill. Until 2006, people like me legally could have been fired from our jobs. Legally could have been thrown out of our apartments. So I have a little sense of what it feels like. And finally, we were able to move that bill forward. That's the type of leadership on social justice, on transportation, on construction, working with others in the other party who sometimes think I'm the devil, but working together so that we actually accomplish good things for the state. That's the type of mayor I would like to be if you elect me. I want to bring people together to address the tough problems that we face. An affordable city, a school district that actually makes people want to live in Seattle and not move out of Seattle, a transportation system that will serve all communities and will be in that we can integrate. I want to work with all of you on making sure that your communities are not isolated, but become part of the full fabric of Seattle. Because what makes Seattle a great city, and I've spent most of my life here since I was a kid, is the diversity of Seattle. So thank you, and I'll ask you again for your vote.
So thank you. I also thought that was the close. So, but it's great to have another 2 minutes. My background, I'm married, I have 3 kids, and I was active in my neighborhood of Greenwood. I was very active in the Sierra Club because I care deeply about the environment and the future. And when I ran for office, it was the first time I'd ever run for office. And I think a lot of people in your communities and elsewhere across the city were fair to ask, would this mayor care about us? And that was a fair question. And we faced hard times, and the first thing I did was go out to talk to the people. The first thing we worked on was our Youth and Family Initiative, where we spoke to people about education, and we doubled the Families and Education Levy, expanded school-based health centers, we have dental care, more early learning, and the next thing I'd like to do is have preschool for all kids in Seattle. I also heard about jobs from you, and we worked to increase minority contracting. I said it's at record levels in the city. And I heard from you, but it's not just the contractors, it's who works on the jobs. So we have new local hire provisions that other cities are copying as well, and require more outreach through our ethnic media as well. I ran for office because I really care about the future. And one more thing on the budget, when we had the budget and we made cuts, I never cut human services, and I never cut anything touching our youth. And when we had the opportunity, we expanded the dollars for youth and for education and for human services. And I didn't run for office to be an important person, although I enjoyed being mayor. But I ran because I want us to look in the future to be able to tell our children we did everything we could to build a place where every culture is respected and treated with equity and dignity. We lift everybody up, and we do something about global warming. I believe in this city. I believe in you. I believe that you, working together with government, we can be the city that other people look to and say, they figured it out. So please, I would love your support and love to keep working with you.
Whatever your decisions are today, or at the couple have more discussion about the issues we've been talking about.